Entamoeba histolytica has a worldwide distribution. It's an amoeba found in fresh water, streams, lakes, ponds, wells. It's even found in underground aquifers. Has a very simplistic life cycle. The trophozoite, which is the large vegetative cell, single cell organism, swims around, and it's a voracious hunter. Anything not it, well, even if the cell it's trying to attack is larger, it will try to eat. Um, Very rudimentary cell, lacks some organelles that you would find in your cells. Multinucleated, has a large and a small nucleus, different chromosomes carried in each. The cyst has different stages, as different layers are laid to protect the cell itself. Um, when negative stimuli, lack of water, increased salt, decreased pH, even antibiotics are encountered, the cell will eject whatever's in its food vacuoles and then start laying down a protein coat, a protective wall. During this process, it'll go through and make copies of all the chromosomes. So instead of being multinucleated with two nuclei, one larger, one smaller, it now has four, two large, two small. They refer to these as chromatoidal bodies. As you see here, the trophozoite becomes a mature cyst. During this existment, after whatever negative stimuli is gone, the individual nuclei, along with the chromatoids, will separate and new internal membranes will be formed. When that cell wall is breached, out comes four trophozoite cells. You ingest one of the cysts. Um, Four of the trophozoites will exist, and they seem to target specific areas of the gastrointestinal tract: cecum, the appendix, the colon, and the rectum. What we see happens is the amoeba will attach to the intestinal wall, attach to the epithelial cells lining your intestine, and since whatever they're attached to is too large for them to phagocytize, what they will do is they will literally transport out digestive vesicles. So they start spitting out lysosomes onto the surface of your epithelial cells. They start digesting your large intestine. As they are spreading, they are increasing in numbers. Binary fission, asexual reproduction. One becomes two, given time, two become four and eight. They are swimming and they are spreading across the surface of your large intestine, whether it's the cecum, the appendix, wherever, and they start breaking down the tissues. This will trigger certain responses in your body. Dysentery. Remember, dysentery is extreme form of diarrhea. Think you now become a garden hose. Okay? That level of fluid passing out. But you're also going to be passing out blood and small chunks of tissue as you're starting to slough off, parts of the linings of your large intestine. Lots of pain. This will all cause inflammation in your intestinal tract, in your abdomen, so there's going to be fever. And this is life-threatening. There is a high mortality rate with amoebiasis. Okay, as the hemorrhaging, you're going to be looking at an increased probability or increased chances for bacteremia, toxemia, amoeba getting into the bloodstream. The amoeba get into the bloodstream and they lodge in different capillary beds around your body. And just because they're lodged there doesn't mean they stop being metabolic. 1 becomes 2, 4, 8. Next thing you know, you have a small growth in the tissues. Under x-rays, they look like tumors, but the cells making up the tumor, the quote-unquote tumor, are not your cells. They are actually amoeboid cells that are all clumped together. As the lining of your large intestine gets literally digested by the amoebas, larger and larger areas will become inflamed, will start to become necrotic. Surrounding the necrotic tissue will be high levels of inflammation, so you start to see abscesses, dotting, all through the large intestine. Each of those areas of those abscesses was started off by an individual or different amoeboid cell. If the amoeba are able to penetrate deep enough into the tissues, get into the capillary beds, as I said, you can become septic as the amoeba are transported throughout the body. They can then lodge different areas: spleen, the kidney, the brain. If you're able to survive this, okay, the severity is not quite there, or it was, but after a few weeks, you start to recover. Doesn't mean that the patient or you have your immune system has removed all of the parasite. It just means that the trophozoites may have been killed or removed, but there are still cysts throughout your body. Now, there is a bit of a timing issue if you look at that first bullet there. During the active infection, you are flushing out. Your body is trying to flush out, or the patient's body is so active in trying to flush stuff out that anything that is not readily adhered to the lining, the intestinal lining, will be flushed out. The trophozoite cells have embedded themselves, or they are directly attached to the tissues. The cysts do not have that ability. So any cells that are starting to form a cyst will be flushed out. Once you or the patient, whichever we're talking about, starts to recover, the diarrhea, the dysentery comes under control, more of those trophozoite cells will start to go into a cyst form, and those cysts can remain lodged in the tissues for quite a while. You or the patient, whichever you're talking about, will now become a carrier. And they, at some point in time, can have a relapse as those cysts forms, exist, become trophozoites, they spread, you get the diarrhea, the dysentery. A few weeks later, you recover, blah, blah, blah. Infection is generally due to ingestion of the cyst form. Drinking or eating The trophozoites, they cannot survive the environment of the stomach, but the cysts are able to pass through the stomach, and then you get the 4 cells existing in the small intestine. Highest occurrence for Entamoeba histolytica will be in areas of Africa, Asia, Latin America. Generally, you're going to find it highest in areas that use night soil, okay, human feces, to fertilize crops or to fertilize rice paddies. That water with the human feces will somehow get into the drinking water source, whether it leaches down into the underground aquifer or they're using a nearby stream as the water source, whatever. That's generally how we see it occur. Here in the US, Entamoeba histolytica actually has a very low prevalence because the majority of homes nowadays are using a municipal water source. And as I've said in a previous mini lecture, even if the houses are not using municipal water sources, we have strict regulations concerning septic fields and making sure they're maintained and minimal chances of those leaching into the underground aquifer, which is this well source for that home. Chlorination of water generally doesn't do much to the cyst, but it lowers the trophozoite numbers. You can continuous chlorination. Any cyst that exist will be immediately damaged by the chlorine. Those cells will be damaged by the chlorine. Some areas they do add iodine, which will then be removed at a later point. Iodine is able to penetrate through the protein coat of the cyst and directly damage the cells. Clinical setting, metronidazole and chloroquine are used as direct treatments. Best thing to do in clinical setting is also get the symptoms, supportive care, rehydration, get the electrolytes back in balance. Different drugs can be used to control the symptoms, along with the anti-amoeba drugs.